Chapter 7. Acid and Freshness from the World Cooking Systems Atlas. After this chapter, you will not reach for salt first when a dish tastes flat. You will know before you have lifted the spoon a second time which acid arrival is missing, and you will know to put it where the eater tastes it, not where you cooked it. 1. The lemon at the edge of the plate. There is a small telling habit that almost every working kitchen has, and almost no home kitchen does. At the pass, before a finished plate goes out, the cook looks at it and reaches, not for salt, not for pepper, not for one more spoon of sauce, but for a wedge of lemon or a small bottle of vinegar. A few drops, a short squeeze, then the plate goes. The home cook, watching, often misreads this as a flourish. It is not a flourish, it is a structural decision being made at the last possible moment. The cook is looking at a dish that has been cooking for 40 minutes or 4 hours, and asking whether the brightness that was in the pan at minute 3 is still on the plate at minute 50. The answer almost every time is no. The acid was there. The acid has been cooked down to almost nothing. The fix is a few drops on top, applied where the eater's tongue will find them. This is the single mechanic that defines the chapter. Acid arrives where you taste it, not where you cook it. If you put the lemon in the braise at hour 1, the eater tastes a softly acidic braise. If you put the lemon over the plate at minute 59, the eater tastes a bright, alive plate. The amount of acid can be identical. The arrival is everything. Most home cooks are trying to do both at once, with a single dose at the wrong moment. They add the vinegar early, hoping it will season the dish, and they get a dish that tastes rounded but flat. Or they squeeze the lemon at the very end, hoping it will brighten the dish, and they get a dish that tastes sharp on the surface and unseasoned underneath. Both are correct moves at the wrong moment. The cook who learns to think about acid in arrivals stops making either mistake. This chapter is about those arrivals, 3 of them, and the rule that ties them together. After this chapter, the taste flat diagnostic from chapter 1 has its strongest single fix, and the acidity balance of any dish becomes audible before the cook has lifted the spoon a second time. 2. What acid is doing, mechanically. The tongue reads acid as sour, which is one of the 5 basic tastes. That is the smallest part of the story. The interesting part is what acid does to everything else on the plate. Acid cuts fat. Not by dissolving it, that is a soap reaction, not a culinary one, but by giving the palate a contrasting signal that resets the tongue between bites. A wedge of lemon next to a fried fillet does not make the fillet less greasy. It makes the next bite of fillet taste like the first bite again. This is why every long-cooked rich dish in every cuisine ships with some acid component nearby. The duck confit comes with cornichons. The schnitzel comes with a lemon. The ramen comes with a small dish of vinegar at the table. The reset is the point. Acid lifts dull umami. A long-simmered broth, full of glutamate and inosinate, can taste round but heavy. A few drops of rice vinegar at the bowl, or a squeeze of lime, take the same broth and make the savory channel readable again. Nothing has been added to the umami compounds. The acid has cleared the channel so the umami can be heard. Acid signals freshness. This is the cognitive part. The human brain reads a bright sour note as, "This was just made." A dish that has been kept warm on the stove for an hour, then squeezed with lemon at the moment of plating, reads to the eater as a dish that has just been finished. The cook is using acid to lie, productively, about how recently the cooking ended. This is not a small lesson. Restaurants run on this. Every chef knows that a plate held for 10 minutes under a warming lamp is a plate that needs a late acid touch to recover. Acid also does mechanical work the cook is sometimes pretending is invisible. It denatures protein, which is why ceviche fish turns opaque and firm without heat. It dissolves calcium, which is why pickled vegetables soften over days. It inhibits browning, which is why apple slices keep their color in lemon water. It tenderizes through breakdown of connective tissue, which is why a buttermilk-soaked chicken pulls apart and a plain milk one does not. The mechanic the cook should remember: acid changes the structure of what it touches, and the change takes time. A 2-second squeeze on a hot plate barely affects structure. A 12-hour marinade affects it completely. Acid loses its brightness with heat. This is the most important fact in the chapter for braises and stews, and it is the engine behind the acid balance work that this chapter is built on. Vinegar simmered for an hour is no longer the same vinegar. Its acetic acid is still acid by titration, but the volatile aroma that the brain reads as bright is gone. The same is true of lemon juice, wine, tomato, and most fermented sauces. They contribute acid at the start, They contribute almost no perceived brightness at the end. A cook who understands this stops being puzzled when their 3-hour stew tastes flat, despite the cup of wine and the spoon of vinegar they put in at the beginning. Those went in. They have done their structural work. They have left the building. The 3 acid arrivals. Every acid the cook adds to a dish is doing one of 3 jobs. The job is set by when the acid arrives, not by what kind of acid it is. Built-in acid. The acid is in the pot from early in the cook. Tomato in the braise, white wine in the deglaze, vinegar in the marinade, citrus zest in the rub. This acid is doing structural work, denaturing protein, dissolving connective tissue, helping form gels, balancing the sweetness of long-cooked vegetables. By the time the dish is plated, this acid is no longer perceived as acid. It has become part of the body of the dish. The mistake is to expect built-in acid to also do the work of late acid. A cook adds 2 cups of wine to a stew at the start, simmers for 3 hours, and is surprised when the stew tastes round and heavy on the palate. The wine is in there. It seasoned the dish from inside, but the dish does not taste bright, because by the time the wine is plated, every volatile that made it bright has evaporated. The structural acid did its job and walked off the stage. Ribollita is a clean demonstration. The tomato sits in the pot for an hour and a half, breaking down with the cabbage and the beans and the bread, building the body of the soup. By the end, the tomato no longer reads as tomato. A drizzle of olive oil over the bowl restores some brightness, but the built-in acid has already disappeared into structure, on purpose. Late acid. The acid goes on at the end, and barely cooks. A squeeze of lemon over the fish as it leaves the pan. A spoon of red wine vinegar over the warm lentils. A handful of chopped parsley with lemon zest folded into the stew at the last minute. This acid is bright, volatile, and forward. Its aromatic compounds are intact because they have not been driven off by heat. The brain reads this acid as the dish was just made. Chimichurri is built around this exact arrival. The herbs are chopped raw. The vinegar and oil are mixed cold. The sauce is spooned over hot beef minutes before eating. The acid never touches a flame. Every volatile in the parsley, every volatile in the vinegar, is still in the bowl when it reaches the plate. The result is a sauce that reads as if it has been alive for 15 seconds, because in flavor arrival terms, it has. The mistake with late acid is overcooking it by accident. The cook squeezes lemon into a sauce, then leaves the sauce to reduce for 10 more minutes to thicken it, and the lemon disappears. The fix is to reduce the sauce first, then add the lemon last, then plate without further heat. The order matters more than the amounts. Structural acid. The acid is the dish's whole spine. A vinaigrette, a ceviche, a pickle, a gastrique. The dish is not a dish that was seasoned with acid. The dish is acid in a particular state. Remove the acid and there is no dish left. Classic vinaigrette is the canonical example. Oil and vinegar in roughly 3-to-1 ratio, plus salt and a mustard or shallot to help the emulsion. Take the vinegar out, and you have flavored oil. The vinaigrette is not a sauce that contains acid. It is acid given body by oil. The same logic governs asparagus vinaigrette. The dish is not asparagus with dressing. It is asparagus dressed in such a way that the acid becomes the spine the palate reads first. Gazpacho takes this further. The dish is essentially raw vegetables blended with sherry vinegar and olive oil. Eaten cold. There is no cooking. The acid is not a finish. It is the entire backbone of the dish. Reduce the sherry vinegar by half, and the gazpacho loses its identity. It becomes a tomato puree. Structural acid teaches a thing the cook needs to remember when reading new dishes. Some dishes are not dishes with acid in them. They are acid that has been given shape by other ingredients. Knowing which kind of dish you are reading is half the work of cooking it well. The single rule. The rule that ties all 3 arrivals together can be stated in one sentence. Acid arrives where you taste it, not where you cook it. If you want the eater to taste a bright lift on the palate, put the acid on the plate. If you want the dish to have a softly acidic body that does not read as bright, put the acid in the pot at the start. If you want both, you need 2 doses at 2 moments, one early for structure, one late for arrival. The same lemon, cut once into a marinade and once over the plate, becomes 2 different ingredients depending on when it is used. This is the single most useful sentence in the chapter. It explains why a recipe that calls for 2 tablespoons of vinegar, without specifying when, is failing the cook. It explains why a chef tastes the dish twice, once during the cook, once at the pass, and adjusts at both moments. It explains why almost every restaurant stocks a small bottle of vinegar and a lemon at the pass. The home cook who internalizes this rule stops a particular kind of failure. They stop putting all their acid in early, then wondering why the dish tastes flat. They stop putting all their acid in late, then wondering why the dish tastes sharp on the surface and unseasoned in the middle. They start asking, at the start of the cook, which arrival am I designing for, and where will I put the acid that arrives? There is a small operational form of this rule. When in doubt, save half your acid for the plate, put half in early, where it will do structural work and disappear into the body. Save the other half for the moment before serving. Taste the dish before the second dose. If the dish already reads as bright and alive, skip it. If the dish reads as round but flat, apply it. The decision is made fresh at the moment of plating, not committed at the start. How different cuisines build acid. Every cuisine uses acid. They do not arrive the same way. What follows is a brief tour through several traditions, framed as variations on the same grammar. When does the acid come in? And which arrival does the tradition favor? None of these is exhaustive. None is the only way that tradition cooks. They are starting points for the cook who wants to read a new dish and predict how its acid is moving. French, built in and late, in 2 doses. The wine goes in at the deglaze and reduces, becoming structural. The squeeze of lemon goes on at the plate. The vinaigrette is structural on a salad. Acid in a French kitchen tends to be deep and quiet until the very last second, when a small brightening touch arrives on the plate. Italian, built-in tomato, structural vinegar, late lemon, usually 1 at a time. A long-cooked ragu relies on the tomato for built-in acid. A panzanella relies on the vinegar as structural. A grilled fish gets a wedge of lemon at the plate. The Italian instinct is to pick 1 acid arrival and trust it, rather than layering 3. Japanese, structural and quiet, almost never late. The vinegar in sushi rice is structural. Without it, the rice is not sushi rice. The vinegar in a tsunamono is structural. The acid in a ponzu is structural. When acid does arrive late, it is usually citrus aroma rather than juice, yuzu zest, sudachi rind. The Japanese palate reads citrus zest as a kind of late aroma that happens to be slightly sour, rather than as a sour signal. Iwashi nanbanzuke is the cleanest demonstration of structural acid in the Japanese pantry. Small fish, briefly fried, dropped into a hot vinegar soy mirin bath, left to soak for hours or overnight. The fish absorbs the acid softens the small bones, the dish becomes a fish-shaped piece of vinegar. The fish is always cooked first, never raw. This matters. Latin American broad, bright and structural, often as the dish's whole spine. Ceviche is acid given fish shape. Aguachile is the same with chili pushed forward. The chimichurri is late acid given herb shape. The pickled red onion sits on top of everything. Tacos, grain bowls, fried fish as a small structural acid topping that brings brightness to every bite it touches. Pickled red onion is one of the most useful built-in acids in a home kitchen. A quick brine of vinegar and salt, 20 minutes on the counter, and a jar that lives in the fridge for 10 days, ready to wake up any plate that has gone round and quiet. Levantine and Eastern Mediterranean, late and abundant. Lemon arrives on almost everything at the moment of eating, over the hummus, the rice, the grilled fish, the braise. Sumac contributes a dry, fruity acid on top of dips. Pomegranate molasses contributes a sweet tart late acid to grain dishes. The Levantine instinct is to send the dish out plain and put the acid on at the table. German and Eastern European, built-in and brined. The sauerkraut, the pickled herring, the dill pickle, dishes built on acid that has been working for days or weeks. The structural acid is often fermented, rather than vinegar added, which gives a different quality. Rounder, more aromatic, less sharp. Chinese, regional with simplification. Variable, but the standout pattern is vinegar at the table. Dumplings come with black vinegar. Noodles come with a small dish of chinkyung vinegar. The eater adds it bite by bite. The cook does not commit the dish's acid balance. The eater does. Mexican, late and bright. The lime is squeezed at the table over almost every plate that contains meat or seafood. The salsa contains lime juice as a structural element. Pickled jalapenos bring built-in acid. Mexican cooking layers 3 arrivals on the same plate and trusts the eater to combine them. The point of this tour is not memorization. It is the shift in the cook's head from, this cuisine uses lemon, that cuisine uses vinegar, to, this cuisine puts its acid here in the timeline, that cuisine puts its acid there. Once that shift has happened, the cook can read a recipe from a tradition they have never cooked and predict, before they start, how the acid will arrive on the plate. The pH of cooking versus the pH of eating. The acid the cook adds to a pot is not always the acid the eater tastes. This is the chapter's quietest but most useful idea. There is a difference between the pH of the dish during cooking and the pH of the dish at the moment of eating. Several things happen between the pan and the plate. Volatile acid aromas evaporate. Bases form during slow cooking. Cooked tomato becomes less acidic. Cooked wine reduces in acid sharpness. Long-simmered broth becomes mildly alkaline as collagen breaks down. Acidic ingredients that contained both acid and volatile aroma have lost the aroma but kept the titratable acid, meaning the dish is technically acid by measurement but does not taste acid to the eater. The cook needs to learn to taste for perceived brightness rather than for measurable acid. A long-cooked stew with 2 cups of wine and a spoon of vinegar in it may be entirely well acidified by pH meter and still taste flat on the palate. The titration says yes, the brain says no. The brain is the one buying dinner. This is also why some dishes change character dramatically between the pot and the bowl. A Thai curry made with lime juice in the pot tastes one way. The same curry with the lime juice held back and added at the table tastes brighter, sharper, and more present. The lime juice in the pot has been doing structural work. It has not been doing arrival work. The operational lesson. When in doubt about whether to add acid early or late, ask whether you are trying to season the dish early or signal freshness to the eater late. If both, do both. If only one, choose, and don't expect one to do the work of the other. Worked examples from the catalog. The next move is to look at recipes through the acid arrival lens. The recipes below are linked to the site. Each note reads what acid work the dish is doing and at which arrival. Classic vinaigrette. The canonical structural acid. Oil and vinegar in roughly 3:1 ratio, salt, mustard to help the emulsion, a shallot or garlic for aromatic depth. The vinaigrette is not a dish seasoned with acid. The vinaigrette is acid given body by oil. Once a cook can balance one vinaigrette by feel, they can dress every salad, every grain bowl, every cold protein with structural acid that arrives bright. The ratio is a starting point, not a rule. A bitter green wants more acid, a sweet root vegetable wants less. The cook tastes the dressing on a leaf, not from the bowl. Asparagus vinaigrette. Structural acid is a finishing system. Cooked asparagus, room temperature, dressed in vinaigrette and held for 10 minutes before plating. The acid migrates partly into the vegetable. The oil coats. The result is a dish where the vegetable carries the vinaigrette inside as well as outside. This is structural acid in its most useful home kitchen form, not a dressing splashed on at the last second, but a dressing that has been allowed to live with the vegetable for a few minutes, so the acid arrives in 2 layers. The surface bite, then the slower release from the vegetable. Chimichurri, late acid bound with herb, parsley, oregano, garlic, red wine vinegar, olive oil, salt, dried chili, chopped together cold, and spooned over hot grilled meat at the moment of eating. The vinegar never sees a flame. The herbs are raw. Every volatile in the parsley and every volatile in the vinegar reaches the eater in their full state. The acid resets the palate between bites. Read this sauce as the architectural opposite of a ragu, where the ragu cooks everything in for hours. The chimichurri keeps everything out until the last second. Gastrique. Caramelized acid as sauce base. Sugar cooked to a deep caramel, then deglazed with vinegar, then reduced. The result is a sauce base that is acid and sugar at the same time, with the caramelized sugar contributing roundness and the vinegar contributing brightness. The two opposing notes hold each other in tension. This is one of the few cases in the chapter where acid is cooked deliberately. But the cooking is not to mellow the acid. It is to fuse the acid with caramel. Read the gastrique as the trick that lets a sauce taste bright and rich at the same time. Most dishes have to choose one. Gazpacho. Acid as the entire spine. Tomato, cucumber, pepper, garlic, sherry vinegar, olive oil, bread, salt. Blended cold, eaten cold. There is no cooking. The acid is not a finish, it is the dish's whole skeleton. The sherry vinegar does the work of binding, brightening, and seasoning at the same time. Reduce the vinegar by half, and the gazpacho falls apart structurally. It becomes a chilled tomato puree. This is the cleanest demonstration in the catalog of acid as the spine of a dish that is not, technically, an acid dish. Pickled red onion, built-in acid as condiment. Red onion sliced thin, packed into a jar, covered with hot vinegar and a pinch of salt and sugar, left to cool on the counter. After 20 minutes, the onion is bright pink and tart. The jar lives in the refrigerator for about 10 days. This is a small structural acid factory that turns any heavy or round flavored dish into a brighter version of itself with a single bite. Keep refrigerated, use within 10 days. The brine is for the fridge, not for the pantry. Do not can store these without a tested pressure canning procedure and equipment. Iwashi nanbanzuke, Japanese structural acid bath. Small sardines or anchovies, dredged and fried until cooked through, then dropped into a hot bath of vinegar, soy, mirin, dashi, and a small amount of sugar, with shaved chili and onion. The hot bath cools to room temperature with the fish in it. The fish marinates for several hours or overnight. The acid penetrates, softens the small bones, and the dish becomes a structural acid preparation that keeps for several days refrigerated. 2 non-negotiable safety notes. First, the fish is fried before it meets the vinegar, never raw. Vinegar does not kill the Anisakis parasite that lives in some raw small fish, only freezing, -20 Celsius for at least 24 hours per commercial standards, or thorough cooking does. Second, store refrigerated and use within 4 to 5 days. Lemon curd, acid in a cooked custard, egg yolks, sugar, lemon juice and zest, butter, cooked together over gentle heat until thickened. The acid is the dish's flavor spine, the eggs are the body, the butter is the carrier. The curd reads as a structural acid dessert that is also a custard. One important safety note, the curd should be cooked to at least 80 degrees Celsius with sustained whisking, both to set the proteins for stable texture and to pasteurize the eggs for shelf safety. This is not a to-your-liking decision, the way soft yolk eggs in other contexts can be. A lemon curd that has not reached 80 degrees Celsius should not be jarred for keeping or served to pregnant, immunocompromised, very young or very old eaters. Store refrigerated and use within a week. Ribollita, built-in acid carried by tomato and bread, Tuscan bean and cabbage soup, thickened with day-old bread, built on a base that includes tomato, simmered for an hour and a half or more. The tomato is the dish's built-in acid. By the end of the cook, it no longer reads as tomato, but as the body of the soup. There is no late acid in the canonical version. The dish is intentionally round. A drizzle of olive oil over the bowl carries some brightness, but the acid signal is structural and quiet, not bright and forward. Read this as the opposite of chimichurri, a dish where the cook has chosen to put all the acid in early and to let it disappear into the body on purpose. 8. Common misunderstandings. Acid is for finishing. Sometimes. Often it is for structure. A vinaigrette is acid for structure. A pickle is acid for structure. A ceviche is acid for structure. The cook who treats every acid as a finishing squeeze loses access to half the things acid does. Acid loud means acid right. A dish that screams sour on the first bite is usually a dish where the cook has overdone the late acid in compensation for missing structural acid earlier. A well-balanced acid dish reads bright but does not pucker. If your palate is locked into a sour grimace, you have too much late acid and probably the wrong amount of fat or salt to carry it. Vinegar and lemon are interchangeable. They are not. Lemon brings citrus volatiles, the bright aromatic compounds the brain reads as fresh, alongside its citric acid. Vinegar brings acetic acid aroma, and, depending on the vinegar, a fermented base note. A dish that calls for lemon does not work the same with vinegar, even at the same titratable acid level, because the aroma is different. A dish that calls for vinegar does not work the same with lemon. The cook can substitute when no other option is available, but it is a substitution, not an equivalent. Cooking acid mellows it. Cooking acid evaporates its aromatic volatiles and leaves the titratable acid behind. The cook reads the mellowing as the acid having lost strength, but in pH terms, the acid is still there. This is why a long-cooked stew with wine can read as flat, no bright aroma, and yet sting the palate after several bites. The acid is in the body. The fix is rarely more cooking. It is balancing with fat, salt, or a touch of sugar. Acid kills bacteria. Pickles are shelf-stable. Some acid preparations are shelf-stable. Most are not. A quick refrigerator pickle made with raw cold brine is not shelf-stable and must be refrigerated. A canned pickle made under tested pressure canning conditions is shelf-stable. Confusing these is dangerous. The default assumption for any acid preparation made at home should be refrigerated and used within days, unless the cook has followed a tested canning procedure. The same is true for the vinegar bath of Iwashi nanbanzuke. Refrigerate and use within 4 to 5 days, not weeks. Vinegar denatures fish. Ceviche-style preparations are safe with any fish. Acid changes the texture of fish protein, making it opaque and firm, but it does not reliably kill parasites or pathogens. Ceviche-style preparations require fish that has been previously frozen to commercial standards, or sourced as sashimi grade, for parasite safety. Iwashi nanbanzuke avoids the question by frying the fish first. This is not a small distinction. Fermented acid is the same as added acid. Fermented acids, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, fish sauce, carry not just acetic or lactic acid, but a complex base note of fermentation aromatics that vinegar from a bottle does not have. A spoon of kimchi juice at the end is not the same as a spoon of white vinegar, even at similar pH. The fermented version brings depth alongside brightness. This dish has tomato in it, so it has enough acid. Often false. The tomato in a long-cooked sauce contributes built-in acid that disappears into the body by the time the dish is plated. The eater tastes a rounded sauce, or vinegar can wake the same sauce on the palate without changing its character. 9. Chef's view. In the small kitchen I worked in for a year in Hanoi, the soup cook kept a single old bottle on his station. It was rice vinegar, the cheap kind, in an unmarked recycled glass jar. He used it for nothing during the cook. He used it for one thing at the pass. Every bowl of pho that left his station got a small swirl of that vinegar on the surface, just before the herbs went on top. Not enough to taste as vinegar. Enough that the broth would arrive at the table as bright. He had built the broth for 6 hours, with all the structural acid the recipe could absorb. The tomato had gone in, the lime peel had gone in, the wine substitute had gone in, and at the end, the broth tasted exactly like a 6-hour broth tastes. Round, deep, heavy, not bright. The vinegar at the pass was the brightness. He told me once, when I asked, that the broth at hour 6 had everything it would ever have except arrival. The vinegar was the arrival. Without it, the broth was a wonderful liquid in a bowl. With it, the broth was a bowl of pho that the eater would remember. I have thought about that bottle in many kitchens since. There is a small ritual in restaurants almost everywhere I have worked. A wedge of lemon on the cutting board at the pass, or a small bottle of vinegar tucked behind the salt cellar, or a saucer of yuzu juice on a Japanese line, or a halved lime on a Mexican line. The form changes, the function does not. The cook is keeping an arrival in reserve for the last moment, because no amount of building in advance can produce the brightness that arrives on a finished plate from a fresh squeeze. The other thing I learned in that kitchen is that the soup cook never trusted the broth alone to tell him whether the dose was right. He would build a small test bite on a spoon, a sip of broth, then a sip with vinegar, then a third sip of plain broth again. He was watching for the moment where the third sip felt flatter than the first. When that happened, the dose was right. The brain had calibrated to brightness, and on returning to plain broth, found it flatter than it had been 30 seconds earlier. This is the chapter's central craft. The cook is not measuring acid. The cook is measuring the change the acid makes to the palate's reading, before and after. A small change is a small dose. A large change is a large dose. No change is the wrong acid, or the wrong moment, or both. Most home cooks were taught to add acid by spoon and quantity, which is the wrong unit. The unit is perceived brightness, and the only instrument that reads it is the cook's own palate. 10. How to read a new dish for its acid arrivals. The cook who has finished this chapter can do something new. They can pick up a recipe from a tradition they have never cooked. A Persian stew, a Filipino sour soup, a Sicilian fish, a Korean braise, and read its acid arrivals before they have started. The reading goes in 4 small questions. What acid sources does the dish use? List them. Tomato, lemon juice, sherry vinegar, tamarind, pomegranate molasses, fermented sauce. Sometimes the dish lists 3 or 4, sometimes only 1. 2. When does each one enter? This is the key question. An acid that enters in step 1 is doing structural work and will mostly disappear by the plate. An acid that enters in the final step is doing late arrival work and will be the dominant brightness. An acid that defines the dish from the start, a vinaigrette, a ceviche, is structural and will not change. 3. Is the cuisine likely to want a late dose at the table? Some cuisines, Mexican, Levantine, Vietnamese, Thai, almost always do. Some cuisines, French, Italian, Japanese, usually do not. The cook is expected to have committed the balance at the stove. If the recipe does not mention a late dose, but the cuisine expects one, the cook can add it without violating anything. A dish with 2 cups of wine and an hour of simmering is going to go flat by the time it is plated. The cook should plan a late dose. A dish with a vinaigrette dressing made minutes before serving will not. The structural acid is still bright. A dish with citrus juice in the cooking and no citrus zest at the end will read as rounded. The cook can add zest for arrival without adding more acid for body. These 4 questions take less than a minute and prevent the most common acid mistake in the home kitchen, assuming that an acid added at any point in the recipe will arrive on the plate. It will not. The acid arrives where the cook has put it last. Most recipes specify what acid, but not which arrival. The arrival is the cook's job to choose. Summary. The reader who has finished this chapter has gained at minimum 4 things. First, the language. Acid has 3 arrivals: built-in, late, structural. And the cook who keeps these 3 words separate stops making the most common acid mistake in the home kitchen. Second, the rule. Acid arrives where you taste it, not where you cook it. This single sentence solves more flat dish problems than any other single intervention in the 7-axis model. Third, the pH versus tasting distinction. The dish that is acidic by measurement may not be acidic to the eater. The cook is tasting for perceived brightness, not for titratable acid. The instrument is the palate, calibrated by a sip before and a sip after. Fourth, the eye for new dishes. The cook can now read a recipe from a tradition they have never cooked and predict, in 4 small questions, in under a minute, how the acid will arrive on the plate, and where the dish is likely to need a late dose. What this chapter has not done is given you a single number to follow. There is no 3 tablespoons of vinegar will fix this line in the chapter. Acid is not a measurement problem. It is a timing problem dressed in a measurement disguise. The cook who reads the timing correctly does not need to measure. The next dish you cook, before you put it on the plate, take a small spoon of it. Put a single drop of lemon or vinegar on half of the spoon. Taste the dressed half, then the undressed half, then the dressed half again. If the 3rd sip is flatter than the first, the dish wants the late acid you just tested. Apply it on the plate. If the 3rd sip is the same as the first, the dish does not need it. Plate it as it is. That single test, applied as a habit at the moment of plating, is the entire working content of this chapter, compressed into 30 seconds at the stove. Acid arrives where you taste it, not where you cook it.